Hello. In a moment I'm going to show you some pictures on your screen. There will be a total of 80 people in those pictures. Hopefully you can see them now. So those pictures, 80 people, they're not real. They're AI generated images, simply pixels arranged by an algorithm. I've put them on the screen to make it easier to visualize a number. I've designed them to be ordinary walkers, the sort of people that you see on any decent day out in the hills. And it really does matter that they're artificial, because in a moment I'm going to ask you to imagine something uncomfortable, and I wouldn't want to exploit any real people, just to make my point. As I said, these images aren't real. They're not real people. But the numbers behind them, they are real. There was a large study covering the 1980s and 1990s on the reasons for mountain rescue call-outs in the Scottish Highlands. In that study, they looked at the number of deaths in the mountains and the reasons for them. And around 18%, about 80 people, died when a navigation error was noted as a significant contributing factor. By visualizing them here, we can begin to comprehend the scale of that loss. So let's scale that up to include the whole of the UK. If we apply similar proportions across the whole country, the picture becomes even worse. Of the roughly 55 people who die in our hills on average each year, around 10% of those involve navigation error somewhere in the chain of events. That means that over a 20-year period, nearly 200 people died in the UK because of a simple error finding their way from somewhere to somewhere else. Navigation may have not been recorded as the official cause of death. That could have been, it might have been a fall, or hypothermia, or dehydration, exposure, or something else. But somewhere earlier in the sequence, it was noted that there was a navigational decision that fatally placed those people in the wrong location at the wrong time in the wrong conditions. And many of them weren't novices. They were competent, well-equipped, and experienced. I'll imagine that's very much like many of the people who watch my land navigation videos. So people like you. And I'm not saying this to frighten anyone. I'm saying it because navigation really does have consequences. And because it's very easy to think that once we understand maps and compasses, we've solved the problem. Which brings me to something slightly uncomfortable. Many of the people who get lost, they can take a bearing. They know how to use a compass. They understand grid north. They can navigate. And yet, they still get lost. And every year, some of those will die because they got lost. So, if that's true, then navigation isn't what we think it is. Because navigation, it's not about maps. It's not about compasses. They're just tools that we use. It's about decision making under uncertainty. It's about what happens in the grey area between I think I'm here and I know I'm here. It's about how quickly we commit to an idea. It's about whether we notice the the quiet voice in the back of our mind that asks, are you sure? That's what I want to talk about today. I think I'll call it the subtle art of land navigation. If you strip away everything right back, the majority of navigation incidents come down to just 3 problems. First, you think you're here on a map and you're not. Second, you think you're heading in a certain direction, but you're not. Third, the map shows a feature, but you think it shows something else. That's it. Most epic tales of we ended up in the wrong valley can usually be traced back to one of those 3 problems. Now, obviously, we could dig deeper into each one of those 3 problems. Also, the reasons for each of them. Why do they occur? But for today, I'll just say those are the main 3 reasons, and we'll leave it at that. I'm trying to walk and film at the same time without tripping over. Let me ask you something. Have you ever stood somewhere and then looked around and thought, well, that must be the path? Not because you were certain, but because you wanted it to be. And once you've made that tiny internal commitment, your brain starts filtering the evidence to support it. And the marsh becomes just a little bit damp, but manageable. The slope becomes, it's about right. The stream becomes, it's probably seasonal. Okay, so here we have it. Now you've stopped navigating and you've actually started to defend a decision that you've made. That's not navigating. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Getting lost very rarely happens in a dramatic moment. It happens in a series of perfectly reasonable micro decisions, tiny ones. You drift a few degrees offline because the ground is awkward to walk on. You don't quite notice the contour change, or you skip confirming a feature because it feels unnecessary. Nothing reckless, nothing stupid, just human. That's how we are. And that's why I say that navigation isn't about maps. A map is static. You aren't. You're tired, you're cold, you're thinking about the weather that's rolling in, or in my case, I'm looking at something that most people would think was mundane, but I think is extremely interesting. Your cognitive load changes constantly. The map hasn't changed, you have. So today, I'm not going to talk about how to take a compass bearing. I'll talk about what happens between the bearings, about judgment, about doubt, about the moment when something feels slightly off and whether or not you listen to it. Because the best navigators that I've met, they're not the fastest. They're the ones who are comfortable with being uncertain. They delay commitment just long enough to be sure. So let's start there. If navigation isn't primarily about maps, what is it about? Well, before we can start on that, let's talk about your brain and its cognitive load. Oh, and before anybody panics, if you're not familiar with the phrase or the term cognitive load, it simply means how much your brain is dealing with at any given moment. How many inputs, how many decisions, how much information it's juggling. And on the hill, cognitive load is constantly changing. Think about this. How many decisions do you make in an hour when you're walking up the hills? Not big dramatic ones, just tiny ones. Do we stay at this height, climb or descend? Is that the path? Are we drifting off course? Should I check the compass? You know, there's lots of it. Is that the re-entrant I was expecting? Are we too high? Are we too low? Do we stop now or do we keep going? Do we turn back? Is the weather getting worse or better? Is the group getting tired? You make dozens, possibly hundreds of micro decisions every hour when you're in the hills. Most of them are subconscious. Navigation isn't one decision every 20 minutes. It is a continuous stream of tiny course corrections. And the problem is, the more decisions you make, the more mentally fatigued you become. If we add in, let's add in the weather. Wind increases noise. Rain reduces visibility. Heat dehydrates you. And all of those increase the cognitive load. Tiredness or fatigue does the same. Hunger does the same. Group pressure definitely does the same. You know, where are we? Are we nearly there? And when cognitive load rises, something interesting happens. We simplify things. We commit faster. We accept it's good enough. You know, this is where confirmation bias quietly walks in. You see a faint outline on the ground and think, that must be our path. And once that idea lands, your brain starts gathering evidence to support it. The line that vaguely heads off in the right direction, yeah, that's good. There's a couple of boot prints in the mud. Excellent. Oh, it avoids the mud, even better. But what about any contradictory evidence? The fact that the line is fading away, the fact that it's slightly off your bearing, the fact that it's contouring when you expected it to go up or down. Well, your brain softens this and explains it away. Because changing your mind requires effort, and effort costs energy. And your brain is trying to conserve energy. With regards to land navigation, psychologists often talk about two things: heuristics and biases. I think of heuristics as a mental shortcut, a rule of thumb that your brain uses to make fast decisions and save energy. In a complex environment like the hills, they're usually our friends. But biases, that's the flaw in this strategy. It's a systematic error that occurs when that shortcut leads you in the wrong direction. A classic example of this is that you recognize a landmark like a ruined wall in the mist and use the heuristic, the mental shortcut, that because you've seen it before, you know exactly where it leads without needing to, take a compass bearing along the wall. And whilst this saves time and mental energy, it becomes a bias when you ignore contradictory evidence, such as the slope being steeper than it should be, or whatever, because your brain is now filtering information to confirm your initial assumption about where the wall leads to. You're simply following the wrong path because it felt familiar. We've all done it. If you're a regular hill walker, a trekker, or a mountaineer, let me ask you something. And I want you to be honest. How many times have you convinced yourself that a feature must be something that it wasn't? Exactly. We've all done it. That's how life is. That's definitely my track. That's definitely the junction I was looking for. This has to be the summit. This must be the stream that I was walking to. And then, about 10 minutes later, you're thinking to yourself, that's a very large error. You realize it. It's not incompetence. It's human cognition under load. Once again, that's how life is. But here's the dangerous bit. Once you say to yourself, we are here, on your map, you stop testing that hypothesis. You stop asking, what would prove me wrong? You stop looking for disconfirming evidence. And again, once again, you stopped navigating and started defending your decision. The best navigators that I know, they're not the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who they delay commitment just a little longer. They tolerate uncertainty slightly better. They allow the terrain to contradict them. And they keep asking, does this still make sense? Even when they're tired. Even in England, even when they're wet, or when the group wants an answer. So if you take nothing else from this section, take this. When cognitive load rises, your judgment changes. Maybe not dramatically, maybe just subtly. And subtle is how most navigation errors begin. Not with a big drama, not with incompetence, but with tiny, almost invisible shift. Over this stream here. So the question becomes, if all that's true, what I've just said, what can we actually do about it? Because we can't eliminate cognitive load. We can't stop being human. We can't remove fear or peer pressure. We can't change the weather or the visibility. But we can train our navigation to account for those situations. As I've said, the best navigators I've walked with do something very simple. They build friction. They deliberately slow the moment of commitment. They don't just ask, does this look right? They ask, what would prove me wrong? That one question changes everything, because it forces you to look for contradictory evidence, not supportive evidence. Contradictory evidence, that's the main thing. If you've arrived at a stream that you were expecting, and is everything else there that's shown on the map? If you think that you're correct, fine. Were you walking on the correct bearing? What should appear on my left or the right? Should there be a steep rise 400 meters in front of me? If there is, fine. If there isn't, ask yourself, is the hill the wrong shape, or have I made a mistake? That pause, that deliberate doubt is not a weakness. It's professional. And yes, I know we're back to the absolute basics of navigation, collecting features. Do that on your very first day. What will I see along the way? It's as I always say, keep it simple. Something that is simple is much less likely to go wrong. I'll give you an example. On my advanced navigation courses, on every course, we always start at the same location. It's just It's a slight bend in a stone wall. And I always tell the group exactly where we are with an 8-figure grid reference. So they know their location to within 10 meters. Then I ask them to go somewhere very specific to a point on the map. Now, I know some people that have been on my advanced courses watch these videos, so they'll be able to confirm this in the comments. Here's the thing. In all the years I've been running those advanced navigation courses, not one single person on the first day has ever gone to the correct location. Not one. Why not? Think about it. Every person joining those advanced navigation courses, they can already read a map. They can use a compass to a good standard. So why can they not find a 10-meter square of ground just a few hundred meters away? I've watched them before they set off, and I would say that one of the main reasons is pressure. The pressure of being on an advanced course, not just a course, an advanced course. The pressure of wondering if everyone else in the course is so much better than you are. You know, there's lots of different reasons, but it all comes down to pressure. So they set off before they've worked out their route. They commit before they should. Oh, one thing I do have to say here is that by the end of the course, every single participant has been able to not only find a 10-meter square of ground, they can do it in the dark, at night, in the middle of vast open countryside, sometimes in driving rain and thick fog. And that's why these courses are called advanced. You know, it's so back to the point. Keep it simple and build in friction. Deliberately slow the moments of commitment. I can't emphasize that enough. There's another habit that I see in good navigators. They separate movement from thinking. They don't try and analyze complex terrain when walking quickly. They stop, they look, and they reset. It's astonishing how many errors that begin with someone who didn't want to pause for 20 seconds. But for some people, maybe, stopping feels like uncertainty. And uncertainty feels like not knowing. And not knowing feels uncomfortable. So we keep walking. But the hills are patient. They've been there for an awfully long time, and they can wait for you to compound a small error into something much more serious. So, here's a practical tip. When you feel slightly uncertain, well, you know, which we all do occasionally, you're not lost, you're just slightly unsure. That is the moment to act. Not 10 minutes later, not when the feature has completely vanished in the fog. Stop at the first flicker of doubt, because early doubt is cheap. Late doubt is expensive. And that's really what this video is about. It's not how to take a bearing. It's not about how to identify a contour, but how we manage the space between certainty and assumption. How to notice when your brain is simplifying things too quickly. How to remain flexible just long enough to stay found. Because, as I said, navigation isn't about being right. It's about remaining correctable. Accept that sometimes you'll get it wrong. You know, let yourself make changes to your route. That's human. That's, you know, it's Let's zoom in for a moment, because if navigation isn't just about technique, if it was just about technique, this video would be very short, just lots of links to other videos I've made. But it isn't. Navigation is risk management. Every leg you plan is a risk calculation. You know, how precise do I need to be? What happens if I drift off my course? What are the consequences of being wrong here? On a broad plateau, in good visibility, the cost of error is very low. But above steep ground with 3-meter visibility, the cost of error is high. Good navigation isn't about being impressive. It's about adjusting your behavior to match the consequences. It's also pattern recognition. The more time you spend in the hills, the more your brain quietly builds models. You know, this is what a spur usually feels like. This is how a re-entrant, this is how it tends to sit in the hill. This is how ridgelines normally behave. They're all patterns. But pattern recognition cuts both ways. It helps you move efficiently, but it also tempts you to assume. And that's where humility comes in. Because the hill will always be better at being a hill than you are at interpreting it. At the moment, you know, you think you've mastered it. Let's just reduce your margin for error by slowing everything down. Navigation also requires, and it really does, you have to accept uncertainty. You'll never have perfect information. You'll rarely have total clarity. So the skill is not eliminating uncertainty, it's functioning well within it. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you changed your mind mid-route when you're heading somewhere? Not because you were forced to, but because you noticed something subtle and you adjusted early. Isn't that what we're meant to do? Yes, it is. Being safe often means backing off, slowing down, simplifying, even turning around and just go back to the pub. That takes maturity. At its best, navigation it's continuous re-evaluation. Not, I decided 20 minutes ago, therefore I'm correct. Navigation is, given everything that I'm seeing right now, does this still make sense? It's dynamic, it's fluid, it's responsive, and it's slightly humble. Now, I don't want to end this abstractly, so let me leave you with 5 principles. Nothing dramatic, just small behaviors that I think prevent small errors becoming big ones. First, slow down before you're lost. If something feels slightly off, that is the moment to reduce your pace, not increase it. Secondly, decide what would prove you wrong. Actively look for disconfirming evidence. Force your brain to test the idea, not defend it. Third, navigate the terrain, not the map. The map is the model. The ground is reality. If they disagree, the ground always wins. Fourth, if confused, simply shorten the route. Aim for a large feature, use an attack point, reduce the complexity. Finally, never be afraid to stop. Stopping and going back is not failure, it's control. 20 seconds of deliberate pause can prevent hours of error, or worse. Because in the end, good navigation isn't about showing that you know where you are. It's about quietly, consistently ensuring that you actually do know where you are. Thanks for watching.